where an election earlier this month did little to calm the country's political crisis. This week, another 5 people were killed as police cleared protest sites in Bangkok. That's where protesters calling for the Prime Minister's resignation, the so-called yellow shirts, have been occupying official sites for months. And in the north of the country, many people, the so-called red shirts, are outraged by this. Our team in Thailand travelled there to meet those prepared to travel hundreds of kilometres to defend the Prime Minister, Yingluck Shinawatra.
Listen up, everyone. Who's ready to go and defend the government in Bangkok?
We're in northern Thailand, a stronghold of the pro-government red shirts. These men and women all took part in the protests of 2010 that were violently crushed by the military. The atmosphere today is festive, but let there be no mistake. The political crisis in Bangkok is at the forefront of everyone's minds.
We want the government to take action. We're ready to battle with the yellow shirts if need be. They need to be wiped out. Hold on, Yingluck. Fight. The red shirts are behind you.
We are 800 kilometers from the capital, in the red shirt heartland where Prime Minister Yingluck and especially her brother Thaksin Shinawatra are considered heroes and champions of the rural classes. Everyone here is closely following the political unrest.
Oh, they can look down on us. We know what they think of us in Bangkok. They take us for ignorant peasants, but they cannot fool us. We're tired of being treated this way. We're human beings and citizens of this country too. The yellow shirts and the so-called elites of this country must also realize that we're the last generation like this because our kids are going to school. Things are changing.
And things have already changed, like here in the village of Suan Muang, where generations of farmers are now closely involved in politics.
People in Bangkok don't give a damn about us. They don't care about our problems. They've never helped us. They just ignore and forget us, as if we weren't from the same country.
Thailand's farmers are politically informed. Each day, they tune into the top red shirt community radio station run by Mahawan Gawang, a bizarre mix of DJ and guerrilla.
We're ready. Our networks across the country are on high alert. That's why my radio station is so useful. We use it to pass the word out and help us get organized. If the tanks go rolling on the streets, if there's a military coup, we'll come out to defend ourselves. We, the red shirts, are more numerous, organized, and powerful than the yellow shirts and the army put together.
Mahawan is a respected figure within the red shirt movement. Today, he's been invited to a ceremony to promote a government project. The cream of the red shirts has made the trip to lend support to and defend an administration whose authority is dangerously faltering.
We've sent teams to Bangkok to protect the Prime Minister, but the most important thing here is that we're all mobilized for the protection of the countryside. The priority is the defense of our provinces.
Hostile, almost militaristic words. And this language is also present in academic circles, showing a nation anxious of its divisions.
I think the only way for Thailand is civil war. Civil war, the armed fighting between the aristocratic forces and democratic forces. And 2, that will be done maybe violently or by democratic means, separation of the country.
In the Chiang Mai Convention Center, the ceremony goes ahead as if all were normal. And yet, the Prime Minister has not made the trip. She is stuck in Bangkok, replaced today by her Trade Minister, a close ally of the Shinawatra family. Sir, is the government on its last legs? There is no answer. There cannot be. Who can predict the next turn for this divided nation as it struggles through one of the most serious political crises in its history?
And for more on Thailand's political crisis, I'm now joined from Bangkok by Kim McQuay. He's the Asia Foundation's country representative to Thailand. Hello, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Now, you've been living in Thailand since 2009, so you were there when in 2010 the army was called in to clear the red shirts. Are you concerned that the same thing will happen to this protest movement?
There's certainly been that concern since the time that the PDRC anti-government protesters first took to the streets at the end of November, and then since January when they've mounted their Bangkok shutdown campaign. That specter of the 2010 violence has really hung in everybody's imagination. And up until this week, with the exception of a few incidents before and just shortly after the February 2nd election, things stayed relatively quiet, but things took a rather nastier turn this week when the government made some efforts to clear some of these occupied areas of the city, and we did see more significant violence affecting more numbers of people than we have seen. And so that concern is still very much there in people's minds.
Is it likely, though, do you think, that the army will have to step in? Or where do we go from here?
There has been lots of speculation about the role of the army because historically, at several junctures in Thailand's political history, the army would in fact, under previous leadership, have intervened far before this time. So it's quite striking, and I think a sign of really a positive signal that the army, up until this point, has really consciously styled itself in a mediator's role, appealing both to the anti-government protesters and to the government side to try to reach some kind of a compromise resolution that will take the country out of this conflict. So I think the possibility is still there if the law and order situation were to deteriorate, but I don't think it's something that the army wants, and I think they're very conscious amongst the leadership, even in 2010 and previously, any kind of intervention on the part of the army was met with a lot of controversy afterwards, and I really have the sense that the military doesn't want the liability of an authoritarian intervention of that kind today.
Now, protest leaders don't just want the Prime Minister to resign, they want the government to be replaced by an unelected People's Council. Is there much support for this?
I believe that there is very little support for this idea outside of the rhetoric in the PDRC camp and amongst the legions. Thailand is a country in which the constitution is very important. We've had a number of constitutions in Thailand, and the two most recent ones are much more respected, although the current one is a little bit more controversial. But fundamentally, I think that for even those that have been sympathetic of certain elements of the anti-government protests, critical of the Thaksin regime, critical of Thaksin Shinawatra, and during his prime minister time and the allegations of corruption, I think there's only a very few people that would really ascribe to this notion of an extra constitutional People's Council. It's something that has not, there's no sort of sense of who would make up that People's Council and whether it would be time-bound or not. So there's a real apprehension in pushing forward that idea. It would be setting Thailand back a decade or more and going back to a period where elections were not so sacred as they are today.
Now, in our report earlier, we hear of farmers saying in Bangkok they take us for ignorant peasants. Is it fair to say that what's going on in Thailand at the moment is a lot like a class war?
I don't believe that it's fundamentally a class war, but I think that it was striking in listening to your correspondent's report and hearing the interviews with the red shirt spokespersons in the north of Thailand, because I think certainly that feeling, that passion that they were articulating, that Bangkok doesn't hear them, is one that we've seen consistently in Asia Foundation surveys and other things. And certainly the way that the current political crisis and those that have led up to it have been contested, it is in many respects a kind of a contest between one group of, in this case, anti-government factions who really believe in kind of a notion of moral stewardship, that the election results, if the situation becomes difficult or if an election can't be won and there's controversy surrounding a particular government, then you can step outside of the electoral base. And that sense of moral stewardship historically, I think, has meant that the Bangkok elites have tended to treat the rural population as one that benefits from this stewardship and that they're in a position to judge what's best for them. And contemporary Thailand is enormously different from that, as we heard the farmers who were speaking and the red shirt spokesman talking about the education of their children, their economic and their political aspirations and their political savvy. And they are certainly a very different group, making up a vast majority of the population, and one that figures significantly at election time, as we've seen in the last 5 election results when Pheu and predecessor parties have been swept to victory.
Okay, Kim McQuay from the Asia Foundation, thank you very much indeed for your time. We're going to go to a short break now. When we come back, I'll have more on our top story, the renewed violence in Ukraine. I'll be speaking to a protester who decided to leave Independence Square yesterday. Do stay tuned for that and plenty more.
8:30 Paris time.
Les équipements qui exportent.
Reste à savoir maintenant comment les.
Very entertaining film.
I finished ahead of the message audio d'ailleurs ça a suicidé.
Therefore he is dispatched.
Nous avions.
Il y aura que très peu de trains.
Et en fait un temps.
End of the speech.
Des chefs journée historique.
La cathédrale en Union libyenne à l'armée régulière libyenne.
France 24, everywhere.